The thing about stories is that they never really die. You can lock them away, but they'll breathe their way through the cracks of your defenses, slither under the bars of your library doors, swim against the tide of your forgotten shelves. You can bury them deep, but they'll bloom in the darkest corners of basements and attics. Wait until the sun dips low enough to paint them gold. Sometimes they just stand right there, next to you, waiting for the right lips to carry them, for the right hands to shape them, for the right ink to spill them onto paper. Alara Venn was born in a city by the sea. As far as anyone could tell, she was alone. She wasn't always alone, though. How she had stories. Oh, how she loved stories. Tangled themselves in her hair, tickled themselves in her hair, tickled her chin. She would crawl up onto chairs to watch her mother's lips move as she read her fairy tales. She would press her forehead against the cool glass pane of the window, listening to the old woman in the bakery spin tales with her bread and the sugar plums she hid inside. She listened to sailors spinning yarns about krakens and sirens. She traced constellations and made them speak to her. She sang songs to the wind and then strained to hear its replies. Stories were the lifeblood in her veins. But then one day she stopped hearing her own. The music in the air seemed to fall flat. The bakery smelled like burnt sugar. Fairy tales tasted bitter. Even the sea sighed with a weary, silent exhale. The stories were still there, swirling in the water and whispering in the trees, but she couldn't hear them anymore. And so Alara found herself in a terrible position, surrounded by stories but unable to hear them, unable to speak, unable to do anything. She tried everything. She bought storybooks and read them. She begged the old woman at the bakery for sugar plum secrets. She asked the sailors to tell her more. Nothing worked. The stories refused to enter her ears, and so she turned inward. She searched her heart and soul and found something she hadn't known existed, an endless well of stories. Her stories. Her fingers danced across sheets of paper, weaving magic and myth, fear and fancy, and suddenly she was soaring again, carried aloft by the very essence of storytelling. Only, unlike other authors, Alara never wanted anyone else to read her stories. She cherished her solitude, her isolation. She saw the world fade away with her stories, and feared that if anyone shared them, they would drag her back into the darkness she'd escaped. So she hid her books, tucked them in the walls of her home, buried them in the sand by the shore. She kept some close, so close, their spines worn smooth by the ghosts of her fingers. Year after year, she wrote. Each day the stories flowed through her, eager to be free, to spread their wings and take flight. But she never let them go, afraid of what might happen. Then one day, the doorbell rang. It was an unexpected visitor, someone who'd found her books by the shore. It felt the pull of the stories, the silent screams from within, and sought her out. When Alara opened the door, they saw thousands of stories dancing in her eyes. They, too, heard the tales yearning to escape, and so they offered her a deal. They promised to set her stories free, to give them voices and readers. But in exchange, they needed her trust, her name, her image. When Alara realized they weren't asking to be the stories but merely their vessel, she agreed. And so her first novel arrived on shelves unannounced, without fanfare. All it had was a slim black cover and a promise. The house with a hollow door became a whisper in the night, creeping into hearts and minds, leaving goosebumps in its wake. But the woman behind it remained a secret, a phantom presence whose stories resonated with an eerie familiarity. Every year a new book arrived, carrying with it the scent of autumn leaves and secrets. Gothic mysteries, psychological spirals, slow tragedies wrapped in beautiful language. She painted worlds where shadows whispered and secrets bled. Each book hinted at the next, yet stood alone, complete and haunting. Readers searched for patterns, for connections, for any trace of the elusive author. But she remained a shadow, a whisper in the pages. Even so, they sensed her nearness, felt her presence in the careful construction of sentences that mirrored their own thoughts, in the turns of phrase that echoed the landscapes of their souls. She was their dark mirror, reflecting their deepest fears and unspoken truths. And as her readership grew, so did her influence. Entire communities were built around her work, united by their love for stories and their desperate need to understand their enigmatic weaver. But Alara stayed hidden, safe in her anonymity. She saw how her absence fueled their obsession, how it became a character in its own right, shaping and reshaping their perception of her work. And although she basked in the glow of their adoration, she never allowed them to cross the threshold of her privacy. After her fifth novel, a fan began searching for her. They scoured her books for clues, piecing together fragments of stories to form a map. Their journey led them to dusty libraries, antique bookstores, and faded yearbooks, uncovering glimpses of a life lived in the shadows. But the closer they got, the more elusive she seemed to become. She was a wisp of smoke, a fleeting glimpse of moonlight, always present, never captured. Still, they persisted, driven by an insatiable curiosity and a desire to connect with the unseen force that had captivated their imaginations. As the years passed, their quest took on a life of its own, becoming a testament to the enduring power of her stories and the enigma of their author. Her work became a phenomenon, influencing generations of readers and writers. Absence became a character, shaping the very fabric of her narrative universe. Her fingerprints were everywhere and nowhere. She was a ghost in the machine, a whisper in the wind, a heartbeat in the silence. Yet her absence was a constant presence, a reminder that some stories are best left untold, and some authors are meant to remain unseen. And so the hunt continued, driven by a need to understand the unexplainable, to unravel the threads of a life shrouded in mystery. It became an obsession, a consuming passion that defined their existence. But the truth was always just beyond their grasp, hidden in plain sight, silent and elusive. Then one day her books vanished. No more stories arrived. No more whispers in the dead of night. The world held its breath, waiting for her return. But she didn't come back. Years passed, turning into decades. The faithful few never gave up hope. They held vigils on anniversaries of her last book's release, clinging to the belief that she would reappear with a new tale. They scoured the internet, seeking any trace of her presence. They combed through her past books, searching for messages in the margins. They organized societies, planning expeditions to retrace her footsteps. But all they found were echoes and empty rooms. And as time marched on, their ranks thinned, their whispers fading into the cacophony of the world. Yet a few held on, refusing to let go of the stories that had once held their hearts captive. They became the keepers of the quiet, whispering her name into the void, hoping to stir her back into existence. For they knew that when she returned, the stories would flow again, carrying with them the echoes of their devotion and the solace of her enchanting prose. They clung to the hope that somewhere, in some hidden corner of her narrative universe, their paths might converge once more. And so they waited, patient and resolute, ready to welcome her back into their lives and into the hushed embrace of her timeless tales. Because stories never truly die. They live on in the hearts and minds of those who hear them, whispered from generation to generation. Sometimes, just sometimes, if you listen very carefully, you can still hear her voice echoing through the pages, reminding us that even in silence, stories have the power to captivate, to console, and to endure.